We all share a common shimmering dream, the dream of winning the lottery. We imagine that if a mountain of money suddenly landed in our laps, every struggle would vanish and every tear would dry. We believe that with enough gold, we could buy our way out of every problem, stop working forever, and live like the monarchs of old. But history whispers a far darker truth to those who are willing to listen. It teaches us that sudden, unearned wealth is rarely a blessing. More often than not, it is a virus, a slow-acting poison that consumes the soul of a nation. This is the haunting story of the Spanish Empire. In the 16th century, Spain didn't just win a lottery, they found the keys to the world's bank. They discovered a source of silver so vast it fundamentally broke the reality of the human race. They became the undisputed masters of the earth, the first empire upon which the sun never set. They possessed the most feared army, the grandest ships, and what they believed was a direct line to the favor of God. And then they watched it all scream and burn. They were forced to learn the hardest lesson in the history of economics, that gold is not wealth. Gold is a drug. And Spain was about to suffer the most spectacular overdose the world had ever seen. To truly grasp this tragedy, we must travel back to a barren, freezing plateau high in the Andes Mountains of modern-day Bolivia. The year is 1545. The location is Potosi, and the air is about to get very, very thin. Before this moment, Spain was a formidable power, forged in the iron of a 700-year holy war. They were a society of hardened warriors, fresh from the Reconquista, who valued the weight of a sword far more than the balance of a ledger. They were deeply religious and incredibly disciplined, but they were not economically invincible. Everything shifted on a cold Andean afternoon when a local indigenous man named Diego Gualpa stumbled while chasing a lost llama. To save himself from a fall, he grabbed onto a nearby bush, and as the roots tore away from the frozen earth, his eyes met a sight that would ignite the greed of the entire world: shimmering, solid veins of pure silver. He had discovered the Cerro Rico, the rich hill. This was a geological freak of nature, a mountain that was quite literally made of silver ore. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived, they didn't just see a mine, they saw the El Dorado they had bled for. Almost overnight, the desolate wasteland of Potosi transformed into one of the largest and most chaotic cities on the planet, growing larger than London or Paris. It became a city of unimaginable greed and relentless violence, perched 13,000 feet above sea level, where the thin air made men gasp for breath with every step. If you are captivated by these deep and powerful stories from our hidden past, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Wealthime Archive. Your support allows us to keep bringing these historical epics to life and unearthing the truths that shaped our modern world. But silver does not pull itself from the freezing depths of the earth. To fuel their economic miracle, Spain needed a massive, endless supply of human labor. And this is where the dream turned into a waking nightmare. The Spanish crown instituted the mita system, a mandatory labor draft that became a death sentence for the indigenous people of the Andes. Tens of thousands of fathers, sons, and brothers were torn from their homes and forced into the black, suffocating heart of the Cerro Rico. These men were lowered into the darkness for weeks at a time, living in the damp tunnels, breathing in toxic dust, and climbing rotting leather ladders with heavy sacks of ore strapped to their broken backs. It was a common saying during this era that if you were to take a single silver coin minted in Potosi and squeeze it, the warm blood of a human being would drip between your fingers. The local people stopped calling it a mountain. They called it the mountain that eats men. But digging the silver was only half the battle. The ore was often low grade, and to extract the pure metal, the Spanish introduced a revolutionary but deadly technology: mercury amalgamation. They mixed crushed rock with liquid mercury and forced workers to trample the mixture with their bare feet for hours on end. This was an industrial revolution of death. The mercury seeped into their skin and rotted their bones before it finally took their lives. Between 1550 and 1800, Mexico and Peru produced 80% of the world's silver, and most of it flowed directly into the coffers of Spain. They melted it down and minted the most famous coin in history, the piece of 8. This was the world's first truly global currency, the dollar of the Renaissance, accepted in the markets of Shanghai, the ports of Bombay, and the banks of Seville. Twice a year, the great treasure fleets, massive convoys of heavily armed galleons, would gather in Havana for the journey home. When their sails finally appeared on the Spanish horizon, church bells rang across the country in a frenzy of joy. The king breathed a sigh of relief, and the bankers rubbed their hands in anticipation. The party could continue for another year. Spain became the undisputed superpower of Europe instantly. They built the tercios, the legendary infantry squares that dominated every battlefield for a century. They built massive cathedrals adorned with gold leaf stolen from the Americas. King Philip II sat in his gloomy palace, the Escorial, believing he was the instrument of God. But he made a fatal calculation. He looked at his piles of silver and said, "We are rich." He didn't realize that he was actually planting his own destruction. Spain was confusing money with wealth. Money is just a medium of exchange, but true wealth is the ability to produce, to grow food, to weave cloth, to build ships. Spain had found infinite money, but they were about to stop producing wealth. The silver acted like a narcotic, providing a massive high of invincibility, while the vital organs of the economy were quietly shutting down. Farmers left their plows, blacksmiths put down their hammers. Why endure the hard work of building a craft when the silver ships are always on the way? Imagine you're a merchant in Seville in 1550. The city is the gateway to the world, and every time a fleet arrives, sailors pour off the decks with pockets full of silver. Everyone wants to buy your goods. Naturally, you do what any businessman would. You raise your prices. This was the price revolution, the first great inflationary crisis in modern history. As tons of silver flooded the country, the supply of money skyrocketed, while the supply of actual goods stayed the same. Prices in Spain rose by 400%, shattering the social contract. The poor found themselves starving in a country filled with silver, because they could no longer afford the very bread they had once baked. Even worse, because inflation made everything in Spain so expensive, Spanish-made goods could no longer compete with foreign products. Spain became a giant funnel. The silver arrived in Seville and almost immediately flowed out to France, England, and the Netherlands to pay for basic imports. Spain was doing all the dyeing and the mining, only to hand the wealth over to its rivals to buy its dinner. As the French observers laughed, everything is dear in Spain except silver. This economic reality changed the very soul of the country. In England and the Netherlands, a merchant class was rising, building factories and shipyards. But in Spain, working for a living became seen as shameful. The ideal Spaniard was the hidalgo, a minor noble who did no manual labor and lived off a government pension. The dream was to get a government job near the silver tap, not to start a business. While the rest of the world was innovating, Spain was building monuments to its own ego. The empire looked golden on the outside, but inside it was rotting. This reliance on the fleet created a terrifying vulnerability. If the wind didn't blow, the king couldn't eat, and King Philip had a massive appetite for war. He saw himself as the sword of the Catholic Church, fighting the Turks in the Mediterranean and the Protestants in the Netherlands. These were wars of ego, and they were astronomically expensive. To fund them, Philip began spending the silver before it even arrived, taking out massive high-interest loans from foreign bankers. He was essentially taking out payday loans on an imperial scale. By the 1570s, the interest payments on the national debt were larger than the entire revenue of the empire. Spain was trapped on a treadmill, borrowing new money just to pay off the interest on the old. They sold noble titles, sold the rights to collect taxes, and squeezed the peasantry until there was nothing left. The bankers in Genoa and Germany effectively owned the Spanish Empire. The breaking point arrived in 1557 when Philip issued a royal decree suspending all payments. He looked at the most powerful bankers in the world and told them he wasn't paying. It was a financial earthquake that caused banks to collapse across Europe, but it didn't stop the spending. It just made it more expensive, as bankers charged even higher rates to compensate for the risk. Spain defaulted again and again, a generational cycle of borrow, spend, and crash. When the king couldn't pay his soldiers, they turned into mutinous monsters, sacking their own cities in a desperate search for bread. Back home, the government resorted to minting worthless copper coins called vellon, forcing the public to accept them as if they were silver. This junk money wiped out the middle class and sent the economy into a death spiral. By the time the silver veins of Potosi finally ran thin, Spain had nothing to fall back on. They had no industry, no banking sector, and no innovation. They descended into a century of darkness and poverty, becoming known as the sick man of Europe. Meanwhile, the nations that had taken Spain's silver, the English and the Dutch, used that very same capital to spark the Industrial Revolution. Spain was the conduit through which the wealth of the Americas flowed to create the modern world, leaving Spain itself hollowed out and empty. The story of the Spanish Empire is the ultimate warning. Easy money breaks the link between work and reward. Spain drowned in its own gold, serving as a haunting reminder that true wealth is not what you find in the ground, but what you build with your hands and your heart. Thank you for watching this deep dive into the fall of a superpower. If you found this story compelling and want to see more content that explores the rise and fall of great powers, please like this video and subscribe to Wealthime Archive. We will see you in the next chapter.